time for a dirty little secret. Hey guys, welcome back. In my last discussion, I talked a lot about ETFs and I talked a lot about stocks and a little bit of the differences between the two, and mainly that multiple stocks can be a part of an ETF. Generally, they don't do as well or as poorly if the times turn bad, the ETFs that is, because there's multiples of stocks in those ETFs and they are managed by a professional manager. And I did get some questions on my last video that I wanted to clarify up a little bit, but I also wanted to pass on a really neat little secret that I learned a long time ago when it comes to stocks and ETFs. Stick around. So, first things first, I did get a comment on a Facebook page that I shared the video to, the last one that I did. And it was a good comment. I appreciate it. I always appreciate people messaging me back with questions or correcting things that I make mistakes on, because as I said right from day one, I am not a professional money manager. Never have been. I realized I never will be. But I do try to take as much interest as I can in mine and my wife's investments, because we don't have a professional money manager. Anyway, the comment was around the withholding taxes on US investments. And self admittedly, I didn't and don't know everything about that. There are withholding taxes. And my understanding after reading the comment and having a little bit of a discussion is the withholding taxes are kept as a part of the return. So your return won't be as high as it would normally be. And the suggestion that this individual made, which I don't have an issue with at all, is to get that US dollar account, and then there is no withholding taxes on those investments for you. Another comment that somebody did make was about the specific ETF that I talked about being a covered call ETF. And basically, I'll go into that maybe in another session about covered calls and everything. Covered calls typically generate higher monthly dividends because there is a sale to potential investors with an option price to buy a certain stock at. Whether or not the person buys that at that price, the sale of the actual call generates a fee, and that's given back to investors. So again, there's a number of different options when you're looking at monthly dividend paying stocks or ETFs in this case. And some generate much higher revenue than others. And it's all typically dependent on what style of ETF that is. Needless to say, there are ETFs out there that will give you higher monthly dividends with a little bit less of a capital gain, where others will give you not as much of a dividend, but your capital gain typically or quite possibly is going to be a little bit higher. All right, so the dirty little secret. When I first got back into investing about 3 years ago and started to look at where I was going to put my money, I was extremely nervous because I had been in some investments in the past and they didn't do well, and I pretty much lost my money. Didn't change my life, but it was a little bit more than something to just slough off as, yeah. In any case, when I first got back into investing again, I did go into ETFs, and two of the ETFs that I went into were the iShares S&P TSX 60 index, as well as XUU, which is the entire US market. And as I've mentioned in the past, ETFs are all managed by a professional manager, and you can just see here within the iShares TSX 60. So these are the top 60 stocks on the TSX. And you can see the companies that are in here heavily geared towards the Canadian banking sector, which is one of our strongest sectors. And so there's 60 different stocks in here. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to get into the market, get into the Canadian market, and somebody else is managing this for me. So if one of these companies falls off the TSX 60, then they're going to take care of it. If one of these companies starts performing poorly, they're going to take care of it. And all I need to worry about is just putting my money in and buying the stocks. So the same with XUU. The only difference being is that was all American companies. And as I said in my last video, this was an opportunity for my wife and I to get into the American market in a Canadian fund and not have to go through the whole, exchange rate, getting the US dollar account, et cetera, et cetera. So the secret, not long after being in the XIU and the XUU, well, just this only relates really to the XIU because I was only ever invested in Canadian stocks. It kind of hit me, kind of like a hammer over the head. If these are the top 60 stocks on the TSX, then chances are that these are some pretty solid stocks. And what I mean by solid is they've been around enough, they're doing well, they're very stable, and probably or maybe have dividends that are decent. And this is kind of how I got my journey into investing into stocks and getting myself out of ETFs, because the success of a stock, and I think I used the Manulife example, the last video we talked about, where with dividends, my wife is over 40, I think 44% return in 16 months or something like that. But this ETF that Manulife, I'm not sure if it's in it or not, to be honest with you. I think it is. This ETF has done well, but it hasn't done 40%. So again, the ETF will do well. It just won't do the same as a stock. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because if the stocks do great, the ETF doesn't do as great. If the stock does poorly, the ETF does not do as poorly. So if that all makes sense, you're not going to get the high highs, but you're also not going to get the low lows or losses if you end up selling. So if we look at the TSX 60 here, for an example, currently the Royal Bank of Canada is 7.49% of XIU. I don't see a date. Oh, as of February 2nd, 24. So basically, as of Friday that just passed, 7.49% of this entire ETF is invested into the Royal Bank, and it's looks like 906 million, almost 907 million dollars invested in Royal Bank. So I would have to suspect, if I'm an investor and I see this, and this professional money manager has that much money, not his or hers, mind you, but that much invested in this ETF, that company's probably pretty solid. And that's why you've always heard me say Canadian banks, you're never going to go wrong. It's just a matter of, is it a bad market at any given time? But if you look down some of these other companies, Shopify Canada, Canadian Pacific Railway, Enbridge, Canadian National Railway, Bank of Montreal, Canadian Natural Resources, I've talked about in the past, Bank of Nova Scotia, Brookfield, Constellation Software, another very popular Canadian software company, Alimentation Couche-Tard, one of my sweetheart stocks. Anyway, you can go through this, and what that did, there's Manulife there, but what that did is it gave me at least a start to go and look at what different stocks are in here and what might I be interested in. And it was a really, really good, solid start, because if you look in throughout here, and I actually went through before starting this video, there's actually 10 stocks within this 60 that my wife and or I are in. And it's phenomenal, because this was really the beginnings of the portfolio that we have. And there are different sectors in here. Canada is not known to have a ton of sectors. Like, for instance, we're not heavy in investment, or sorry, IT, information technology, Constellation Software being one of the exceptions in here, but there's not very much IT in Canada. But it did allow me to venture out between financials and energy and different materials and discretionary companies. So yeah, if you take the chance to go through the XIU ETF, it at least gives you a start to go and look at, okay, what companies are in there, what's the sector that they're in, and that allows you to at least get a framework to say, well, if they're in the TSX 60, that's a good solid company. Okay, maybe as my financial company, I might get Bank of Montreal. Now, if I want to look at a materials company, I can go pick one of these few that are in the TSX 60. So you can quickly start to build a portfolio there, and get those better gains from the actual stocks themselves, and possible dividends if they pay them. As I said before, though, there is always a risk with the individual stock, but at least this gives you the knowledge. And what I will tell you for certainty, Once you are invested in a company and not just an ETF, you're gonna check as well because you want to see how you're doing. When you're invested in an actual company, trust me, you're following that company every day to see what's happening, what's new, what are forecasts, what are the forecasters saying about that company? Because if it's time for you to get out, you want to get out before bad things happen to your stock price. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. And the only last thing that I'm going to say is just a reminder. I don't make or suggest any stock advice. I don't suggest you buy anything. I'm just trying to give you information to allow you to make decisions for you and your potentially your family's best case scenarios of what it is that you want to accomplish. What I just showed you is something that really helped me learn a lot more about individual stocks by going through those ETFs. And you can pretty much do that, Canadian or American. ETF managers, they know what they're doing way better than you and I. So that's going to wrap it up for this segment. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I thank you for sticking around. As I always ask, if you've enjoyed this video or enjoyed any of my other videos, please consider hitting that Mark C's Place button down below and subscribing to the channel. Tell your friends, tell your family. Until next time, I thank you for sticking around, and take care. We'll talk to you soon.